No one in that room realized that within a single breath, a marriage would die, and a war would be born. Under the crystal chandeliers of the Hyatt Regency Seattle Ballroom, Lauren Blake walked straight through the crowd, as if this stage had been built for her alone. Her evening gown clung perfectly to her body, her smile sharp, her gaze unwavering. She didn't look for her husband. She was looking for Gavin Holt. And when she saw him seated at the central table, she didn't hesitate for even half a second. Lauren turned, sat directly on Gavin's lap, rested her hand on his collar, as if it were a familiar gesture. Then she looked toward Ethan Blake, her husband, and smiled. "Relax, Ethan. Everyone here knows you have never been able to satisfy me." She did not need to raise her voice, yet the words sliced through the air like a blade. The music seemed to pause for a heartbeat. Crystal glasses froze mid-air. More than 60 faces from partners to executives turned in the same direction. Ethan stood there in the middle of that gilded room, suddenly feeling so small he almost lost his shape. Gavin Holt, the man beneath Lauren, smirked. He slowly pulled out his wallet, deliberately taking his time. A single $1 bill was removed, and he picked up a pen from the table. Gavin scribbled one word across it: rent. Then he stood, flicked the bill against Ethan's chest. At the same moment, something thin, light, and white fell into Ethan's hand. Lauren's underwear. "Don't take it personally, pal," Gavin said lightly, his tone almost charitable. "It's just rent." No one laughed out loud, but snorts, side glances, half smiles spread through the room like an infection. It was the kind of laughter people make when they know a line has been crossed, but lack the courage to object. Ethan felt every stare pinning his back cold and sharp like needles. The custom-tailored suit he wore, the symbol of status he once believed in, now felt like nothing more than thin fabric disguising his naivety and foolishness. Ethan Blake, 38 years old, Regional Operations Director at North Sound Provisions, a man who had clawed his way up from nothing. He had washed dishes, slept on friends' couches, worked 16-hour days just to stand here. He thought he had won. That moment told him he had only been allowed to stand here, never truly belong. In the corner of the room, Nora Kim, head of financial controls, tightened her grip on her wine glass. She looked at Ethan with a mix of pity and fear. She knew exactly what kind of man Gavin was. She also knew that tonight, Ethan had been chosen as the sacrifice. Lauren kept smiling. In her mind, this was not betrayal. This was an upgrade. Gavin represented power money doors Ethan had never been able to open. She believed men like Ethan needed to be reminded of their place, and if a public slap was required to teach him, she was willing to deliver it. Ethan bent down and picked up the $1 bill from the floor. His hand trembled, but his back remained straight. In everyone else's eyes, he was the underestimated husband the weak man replaced right in front of them. No one saw the storm forming behind what looked like empty eyes. He turned and walked away. Each step felt like passing through an invisible firing line. When the elevator doors closed, the music was cut off completely. Only his heartbeat filled the space. Ethan stared at his reflection in the mirrored wall. The man looking back still wore an expensive suit, still had a title, still possessed everything others envied. But the eyes were different, hollow and burning with rage. When the elevator opened, the night air of Seattle rushed in, cold and real. Ethan took a deep breath. For the first time that night, he felt like his feet were on solid ground. No one in that ballroom knew that inside the leather briefcase Ethan carried was more than shattered dignity. It held fragments he had been quietly collecting for 8 months, crooked numbers, dirty contracts, names that did not exist. That night they thought they had destroyed him. In truth, they had just awakened someone they should never have underestimated. Ethan Blake stood on the cold, wet sidewalk when the phone in his pocket vibrated as if the world refused to leave him alone for even a single minute. The music from the ballroom behind him still drifted through the air, distorted and luxurious, but to Ethan, it already belonged to another life. Seattle's streetlights cast a pale glow across his face, exposing eyes still burning with anger that had not yet cooled. He did not hesitate. His finger pressed a name, saved long ago, the one person he trusted not to ask useless questions at a moment like this. Marcus Reed answered on the first ring. His voice dropped in less than a heartbeat. "Ethan, are you okay? You don't sound right." "Marcus, I need divorce papers drafted tonight." Ethan said, his voice rough but steady. "Fault-based divorce. Adultery. Public." On the other end of the line, Marcus went silent. Not the silence of shock, but the silence of a man switching from friend to lawyer. "What happened?" Ethan told him. No embellishment, no wasted emotion. Lauren sitting on Gavin Holt's lap, the $1 bill marked rent, the underwear. The entire room watching him like a joke. When he finished, Marcus let out a slow breath. "That wasn't just betrayal," Marcus said. "That was deliberate humiliation." "There's more," Ethan replied. "I want you to dig into Gavin Holt's finances. Everything. I don't think he's clean." Marcus did not ask why. He simply said the one sentence that told Ethan he had called the right person. "Tomorrow morning, 7 o'clock, my office. Bring whatever you have." The call ended. Ethan stood still for a few seconds, letting the trembling in his hands fade. The Seattle night seeped through his expensive suit. For the first time in years, he realized he had nowhere left to go. The house he shared was now just another stage for lies. He called Noah, his younger brother. The call lasted less than a minute. "I need a place to stay," Ethan said. Noah did not ask why or for how long. "Come over," Noah replied. "You're my brother." Those simple words struck Ethan square in the chest. On a night when everything he had built collapsed, there was still something that required no proof. He called his mother. His thumb hovered over the screen longer than he cared to admit. Nearly 40 years old, yet in that moment, he felt like a child about to confess a terrible failure. The phone rang a few times before her voice came through soft and tired. "Ethan, are you okay?" "No," he said. "Lauren and I are getting divorced." There was a heavy pause. Not shock, but the kind of silence that suggested she had been expecting this moment. "She cheated on you?" she asked plainly. "Yes," Ethan said. "In front of a lot of people." She exhaled long and deep. "Then you'll be better off. She never truly appreciated you. No blame, no disappointment. Only the quiet protection of a mother who had watched her son build his life from nothing." Something inside Ethan finally loosened. For the first time that night, he did not feel insane. After hanging up, Ethan did not go straight to Noah's apartment. He started walking. Downtown was still alive. Couples laughed together. Families hurried children toward parking garages. Men in polo shirts spilled out of bars carefree and loud. Everyone looked normal, as if their biggest problem was traffic or a late bill. Ethan used to be one of them, believing hard work alone could buy respect. He stopped in front of the North Sound Provisions headquarters. The company name glowed on the glass like a mockery. 8 months of late nights. 8 months of numbers that never quite matched. 8 months of telling himself it was just a mistake. Standing there, every piece suddenly clicked into place. If Gavin dared to humiliate him publicly like that, it meant he believed himself untouchable. It meant he had done worse things to people with far less power, and no one had dared to speak. Ethan clenched his fists. He might lose his job, his house, his reputation. But standing on that cold sidewalk, one truth became clear. He would rather lose everything than live without self-respect. Somewhere Gavin Holt was raising a glass, convinced that tonight he had taught a man his place. He had no idea that in that exact moment, Ethan Blake had pressed the launch button on a war. not with fists, but with the truth. 8 months before that gala night, a single small number quietly began to shatter everything Ethan Blake believed was safe. It was a late evening at the North Sound Provisions office when most of the lights were off and the city of Seattle outside had faded into pale reflections on the glass. Ethan sat alone in front of his screen, cold coffee at his side, his eyes scanning a quarterly purchasing report. Just one line, a figure slightly higher than normal, not large enough to trigger an alarm, not small enough to ignore. He frowned, checked again, compared it to market prices. The cost of raw ingredients was noticeably inflated. Ethan made a note and told himself it was probably a data entry error. He had been in this job long enough to know not every discrepancy was a conspiracy. But then it appeared again in the next report. A different vendor, the same kind of markup, the same contract structure. A slow discomfort crept up his spine, that feeling when logic says something is wrong, but the heart still wants to believe it is harmless. He began digging deeper, slowly, carefully, like tracing a crack in a wall that was supposed to be solid. Consulting fees appeared alongside purchasing contracts. Companies with names so generic they meant nothing. No real history. No clear employees. Just mailbox addresses and bank accounts. One night close to midnight, when the entire floor was empty, except for the low hum of the air conditioning, Ethan stopped in front of a spreadsheet. He lined up the columns side by side, market price, what the company paid, the difference where the money went. His eyes widened as invisible arrows connected into a familiar shape. This was not a mistake. This was a habit. Ethan told no one. He did not question his superiors. He sent no emails. He understood the system too well. The first person to speak was usually the first to disappear. Instead, he bought a small encrypted drive and began saving copies, emails, contracts, internal reports. He placed them all in a folder on his personal computer, disguised with a name so harmless it was almost laughable: personal tax documents. Every time he copied a file, his heart beat faster, not from fear of being caught, but because he was crossing an invisible line. From a loyal manager, he was becoming an observer, a recorder, someone who no longer trusted the summaries handed out in meetings. Then the email arrived, an email sent by mistake. Not meant for Ethan, yet he was included in the thread. Gavin Holt's assistant was confirming a payment to a consulting firm Ethan had never heard of. The message was short, cold, written like a task repeated too many times to carry emotion. In that moment, Ethan understood he was not looking at internal misconduct. He was staring at a deliberately engineered structure, a system designed to siphon money through hollow shells and make it disappear. He sat in silence for hours after the office emptied. Outside the window, the city slept. Inside his mind, a wordless argument raged. If he stayed silent, his career was safe. His house, his marriage, his social standing. If he spoke up, everything could vanish in a single morning. But another thought cut through, sharp and unmistakable. If he stayed silent, he became an accomplice. Ethan began to see Gavin Holt differently. No longer the confident, polished executive who spoke about growth and vision, but a man building power on fabricated numbers. A man for whom every contract was another step on someone else's back. The irony was that throughout those 8 months, no one paid attention to Ethan. In meetings, he was interrupted. His cautions were dismissed as overly conservative. Gavin preferred people who nodded faster. Ethan was labeled competent, but unambitious, safe, not a threat. No one realized that this underestimation gave him time. No one questioned why he stayed late. No one asked why he insisted on checking raw data himself. No one looked twice at the leather briefcase he carried home each night. When Lauren began to change, when shared dinners grew rare, Ethan felt the fracture. But his mind was consumed by numbers. He believed that if he did the right thing, if he protected the company, everything else would eventually fall into place. The gala night was simply the moment when every mask fell at once. Now standing before the North Sound headquarters, Ethan understood something he had not dared to name 8 months earlier. His real power did not lie in his title or Gavin Holt's approval. It lay in the truth he was holding, and that truth, once exposed, was capable of burning an entire empire to the ground. The first man Ethan contacted hung up the moment he heard the name Gavin Holt. The call ended with a dry click enough for Ethan to understand that fear still ruled many people. He stood still in Noah's small kitchen, staring at the darkened phone screen. Part of him wondered if he had overestimated other people's courage. But a deeper part knew that if everyone had been willing to speak, that empire would have collapsed long ago. Ethan did not give up. He called the second person, then the third. Most did not answer. A few picked up their voices trembling as they searched for excuses. The same words repeated again and again. I have a family, I do not want trouble, that is in the past. Each rejection cut like a blade, reminding him that Gavin Holt did not buy silence with money alone, but with fear. The fourth call reached Miguel Alvarez, a chef who had once worked for a restaurant acquired by North Sound. Miguel stayed silent for a long time after Ethan introduced himself. The breathing on the other end was heavy and slow, as if the man were weighing something that could shatter his life. Why are you asking about Gavin Holt? Miguel finally said, his voice low and guarded. Because I believe what happened to you was not personal, Ethan replied. And because if no one speaks, it will keep happening. The silence stretched so long, Ethan thought the line would go dead again. Then Miguel exhaled a weary breath from someone who had carried a burden for too long. He told his story. 12 years in a small kitchen, working his way up from dishwasher to head chef. That restaurant was his entire life. Then Gavin arrived, talking about expansion, standardization, the future. After that came mandatory contracts, forcing them to buy ingredients from Gavin's partners at prices several times higher than the market. Quality dropped. Customers complained. Profits vanished. Did the owner fight back? Ethan asked. He did, Miguel said, and a week later, he was accused of embezzlement. Gavin's lawyers told him if he did not sign the transfer, they would send him to prison. Ethan closed his eyes. The numbers he had seen in spreadsheets now had faces, voices, lives behind them. Miguel hesitated when Ethan asked about testifying. I have a child, he said. If I speak, Gavin will crush me. If you do not, Ethan replied slowly and firmly, he will crush someone else. Miguel did not answer right away, but before hanging up, he asked for Ethan's number. 2 weeks later, as Ethan was organizing files inside the disguised folder on his computer, his phone vibrated. An unknown number. The voice on the other end whispered, tense and careful. Are you Ethan Blake? Yes, Ethan said. Who is this? My name is Rafael Soto, the man replied. I used to own a chain of deli shops before North Sound bought them. I heard someone is looking through old accounts. Ethan's heart pounded. Where did you hear that? I still have friends in the supplier industry, Rafael said. They said someone is asking questions no one has dared to ask in a long time. Rafael explained how he had been forced to sign falsified valuation reports. If he refused, the deal would collapse, and he would lose everything. He had been afraid, but he kept copies. If you are really doing what I think you are doing, Rafael said, his voice hardening, then you are not alone. Ethan leaned back in his chair, feeling air finally return to his lungs. When he asked Rafael if he was willing to testify, the silence that followed was almost painful. Then the answer came clear and firm. If it stops him from hurting others, I will. After the call ended, Ethan sat still for a long time. This was no longer just his plan. It was a line of people slowly stepping out of the shadows. Miguel called back the next day. He had spoken with his wife. They decided to do the right thing. I will stand up, Miguel said, but you have to promise we do not quit halfway." "We will not," Ethan replied. In the weeks that followed, Ethan contacted more people. Not everyone dared to speak, but enough did to form a pattern that could not be denied. Different stories, the same ending promises: overpriced contracts, financial manipulation, then takeover. They met for the first time at a small cafe tucked away on a quiet street. 7 people, 7 broken stories. No one raised their voice, no one showed off. But as Ethan looked around the table, he saw something Gavin Holt had never understood. When people who were once silenced stand together, fear begins to change sides. Ethan Blake, the man once dismissed as too safe and too cautious, was now holding more than just files. He was holding the trust of people who had lost too much to remain silent. And he knew that from that moment on, there was no turning back. The morning Ethan Blake stepped into Marcus Reed's office, the entire room seemed to compress, as if holding its breath before a storm. The divorce papers lay on the desk, the ink still fresh, but Ethan's eyes did not linger on them. He sat upright, hands clasped together like a man who had already decided his fate before the door ever closed. Marcus studied him and saw not only pain, but a chilling calm, the look of someone who had hit the bottom and now had nothing left to lose. "We can pursue a fault-based divorce," Marcus said slowly. "Public adultery, an equal division of marital assets, no spousal support. Do it," Ethan replied. "But that's not the only reason I'm here." Marcus paused. He had handled countless ugly divorces, pointless rage, empty threats. But Ethan was different. There was something sharp and deliberate in him. "What else do you want?" Ethan took a deep breath. "Gavin Holt is running a financial fraud scheme, not a small one. I have evidence. And I have witnesses." The room went silent. Marcus set his pen down. In that moment, Ethan was no longer the husband humiliated at a party. He was a man holding the key to a federal case. "Do you understand what you're saying?" Marcus asked. "If you do this, you will become a target." "Do you think I'm not already one?" Ethan replied, his voice steady and unshaken. The door suddenly burst open. Lauren Blake stormed into the office like a gust of chaos. Her gown from the night before was wrinkled, her makeup smeared. The hair that was once flawless now hung in disarray. "Ethan, what are you doing?" she screamed. "This is a joke, right? You can't do this." Marcus stood up, his voice calm but firm. "You need to leave. This is a private meeting." "I'm not leaving," Lauren snapped, turning to Ethan. "You're destroying everything. You're destroying us." Ethan looked at her. No anger, no pity. Only a cold emptiness. "We ended the moment you sat on his lap in front of that entire room," he said. Lauren froze, then softened her tone. "What do you want?" "Money. How much will it take for you to forget all this?" Marcus placed the papers in front of her. "This is the divorce agreement. An equal split of marital assets. No spousal support. Your husband is only asking for what he is entitled to." Lauren snatched the papers, her eyes racing through the lines. Her anger faded into panic. "This is impossible." She shook her head. "The house, the cars, the retirement accounts. I can't live on half." "You should have thought about that sooner," Ethan said quietly, before choosing to sit on another man's lap. Lauren's eyes filled with tears. "This isn't fair. Gavin said it was just to teach you a lesson, to put you in your place." Ethan stepped closer, not raising his voice, yet every word struck like a nail. "No one has the right to teach me a lesson by destroying me in front of a crowd." Lauren opened her mouth, then said nothing. Finally, she threw the papers onto the floor. "I won't sign this." "You don't have to," Marcus replied. "We can handle this in court. But you should understand that with the evidence of adultery, we have your position will be far worse." Lauren looked at Ethan one last time. For a brief moment, something like regret flickered across her face. Did 7 years of marriage mean nothing to you? Ethan looked at the woman who once meant everything to him. His heart did not move. It means I wasted 7 years. Lauren turned and slammed the door behind her. The office fell silent again. Marcus looked at Ethan. Are you okay? I am Ethan, said, lifting his head. Now let's talk about Gavin Holt. Outside, Lauren hurried down the stairs, her breathing uneven. In her mind, everything was collapsing. She had thought she was choosing the higher path. Now, for the first time, she felt the cost of that choice. As for Ethan, sitting alone in that chair, he knew a line had been crossed forever. Not just in his marriage, but in his silence. And once a man chooses the truth, there is no turning back. 4 days after Lauren walked out of the lawyer's office, Ethan Blake stepped into a building he had never imagined entering in this capacity. The glass doors of the federal building reflected his face, calm in an unsettling way, as if the storm had already passed and only cold clarity remained. Inside the leather briefcase in his hand, there was no cash, no business contracts, only the truth, and the truth was heavy. Ethan was led into a windowless conference room, a long table, metal chairs, unforgiving white light. Across from him sat 2 people, a federal financial investigator and an FBI agent named Meena Patel. Meena's eyes were sharp, but not hostile, the look of someone who had heard many stories and always searched for what truly mattered. Mr. Blake, Meena said evenly, "Do you understand the seriousness of reporting your employer?" "I do," Ethan replied. "That's why I spent 8 months making sure I was not wrong." He opened his briefcase, slowly, laying out printed contracts, spreadsheets, emails marked cash flows, shell companies, the same mismatched numbers appearing again and again. He did not speak with emotion. He spoke with structure, logic, and connections only someone who had lived with them long enough could see. 3 hours passed without interruption. The investigator wrote continuously. Meena asked brief, precise questions. When Ethan finished, silence settled over the room. "What you've provided," the investigator said, "shows a pattern of organized financial fraud." Meena leaned forward. "I have to ask you this. Did your wife's relationship with Gavin Holt influence your decision?" Ethan did not dodge it. "Yes," he said. "If he had not humiliated me like that, I might have stayed silent longer. But anger does not change the facts. These numbers existed long before that night." Meena nodded without judgment. "We've received scattered complaints before, but we lacked an insider. You just brought us that missing piece." Ethan took a deep breath. "What happens now?" "Now we build the case," Meena said. "But you need to understand something. When Gavin Holt learns you are the whistleblower, he will try to destroy your credibility. He will paint you as a wounded husband seeking revenge. Are you ready for that?" Ethan did not hesitate. "My personal life has already exploded. They have nothing left to burn." Meena allowed herself a brief, quick smile. "Good. Because we need you to continue working as usual for the next few days." Ethan's chest tightened. "You mean face him, pretend nothing happened?" "Yes," Meena replied. "We need more internal proof, and we believe you can access what we still lack." Ethan understood immediately. Gavin Holt's computer, his personal emails, the final link connecting him directly to the shell companies. One wrong step, and everything would collapse, not just the case, but Ethan's safety. He thought of Miguel, of Rafael, of the people who had stepped out of the shadows because they trusted him. He could not back away. "I'll do it," Ethan said. The next 4 days were the hardest of his life. Every morning he walked into North Sound headquarters wearing a mask of calm. Gavin Holt seemed to enjoy it, making pointed remarks during meetings. "You look tired, Ethan. Everything all right at home?" Each comment was a quiet slap. Ethan did not react. He listened. He remembered. Meena had given him a small recording device. Conversations that sounded harmless slowly revealed Gavin's habits, the way he spoke about partners, the way he dismissed rules. Nothing strong enough to convict, but enough to expose the man behind the image. Then the opportunity came, one afternoon. Gavin left early. His office door was ajar, his computer unlocked. Ethan stepped inside his hands, steady, his heart pounding like a hammer. He inserted the encrypted drive and began copying files. Each second felt like a full minute. The elevator chimed. Ethan pulled the drive, stepped out pretending to work at the copier. Gavin appeared in the hallway, suspicion in his eyes. "What are you doing there?" "Copying contracts," Ethan replied, his voice so natural it surprised even him. Gavin studied him for a few seconds, then shrugged. "Just make sure your performance doesn't slip." That night, Ethan handed the drive to Mina. She opened the first file, her eyes lighting up. "This is exactly what we needed. Direct emails, clear instructions." Ethan leaned back in his chair. For the first time in months, he allowed himself to breathe. The war was not over, but from that moment on, the wheels of justice were in motion, and no one, not even Gavin Holt, could stop them. Ethan Blake was fired on the very afternoon he handed over the final piece of evidence to the FBI. The call from Human Resources came quickly clipped, devoid of emotion. "Please return to the office immediately." When Ethan stepped into the conference room on the 12th floor, he saw the cardboard box already placed on the table, holding a few personal items: an old photo frame, a notebook, a pen he once used to sign contracts. A security guard stood near the door, eyes deliberately avoiding his. Everything felt rehearsed, like a ritual performed many times before. Patricia Walsh, the head of Human Resources, pressed her lips together. "Ethan, we regret to inform you that the company has decided to terminate your employment, effective immediately." "On what grounds?" Ethan asked calmly. "Inappropriate conduct at a company event." Patricia read aloud, each word dropping onto the table like a stone. "Behavior that made other employees feel unsafe." Ethan laughed softly, hollowly. He looked around the room at the glass walls reflecting a story turned upside down. "I had money thrown at my chest. I was publicly humiliated. My wife sat on my boss's lap," he said slowly. "And I'm the one who's inappropriate." Patricia could not meet his eyes. "This is a company decision." "I need that in writing," Ethan replied. "With the stated reason." Patricia's hand trembled slightly as she signed and slid the envelope across the table. In that moment, even if she never said it aloud, she understood the company had just made an irreversible mistake. Ethan carried the box out of the North Sound building. There was no applause, no farewell. Yet strangely, he felt lighter, as if the final invisible chain had been cut. That evening, Ethan sat on Noah's couch, the cardboard box at his feet. Marcus Reed sat across from him, reading the termination letter. When he finished, he laughed, this time with the satisfaction of a lawyer watching prey walk straight into a trap. "They just did the dumbest thing possible," Marcus said. "They fired a whistleblower for fabricated misconduct. Retaliation. This is a massive case." Ethan looked at him, exhausted but clear-eyed. "I don't care about the money." "I know," Marcus replied. "But they're going to pay. Not just criminally, civilly too." Across the city, Gavin Holt read the email confirming Ethan's termination and smiled. In his mind, order had been restored, the problem removed, the narrative controlled, the reputation protected. Gavin did not realize that this very decision had turned an investigation into a legal explosion. Days later, headlines appeared. A Seattle-based food distribution company faces federal investigation. Ethan's name was not mentioned, but those in the industry understood enough to start whispering. Meena Patel's phone rang non-stop. Complaints that had long been buried began to surface. Lauren Blake called Ethan that afternoon. Not to apologize? Her voice was tight, practical. "Did you see the news? Does this affect Gavin's shares? My bonuses?" Ethan listened, feeling the distance between them more clearly than ever. "I lost what mattered a long time ago," he said. "You should talk to your lawyer." He hung up without anger, without pain, just finality. In the days that followed, North Sound began to fracture. Suppliers demanded payment. Partners froze contracts. Employees grew uneasy. What had once been shielded by power and fear now stood exposed in the light. Ethan watched it all from a distance without triumph. He understood that justice was not a moment of celebration, but a long, exhausting process that demanded patience. But he also knew that from the moment he held that termination letter, the story had shifted. He was no longer the underestimated man standing silently in the corner of a gala. He was the one who had made an entire system tremble. And though the road ahead was long, Ethan Blake understood one thing with certainty. Once the truth is released, no empire can cage it again. The news broke on a Tuesday morning, fast and cold, like a blade. On the television screen inside the cafe, where Ethan Blake sat alone, the financial ticker flashed a headline, "North Sound, a food distribution conglomerate faces federal investigation." His name was nowhere on the screen. His face did not appear. But Ethan knew exactly what it meant. The spark had reached the powder, and once the fire was lit, no one could control where it spread. Inside Noah's apartment, the air felt heavy. Marcus Reed leaned against the kitchen counterphone, pressed to his ear, taking notes non-stop. Every call brought a new fragment: a former supplier, a manager who had been quietly dismissed, an accountant who had resigned without explanation. People who once chose silence were now speaking, not because courage had suddenly appeared, but because fear had changed sides. Meena Patel called Ethan just after midday. Her voice was quick, tightly controlled. "We've received more than 20 additional complaints since the news broke. Not just restaurants, suppliers, even some customers. The scope is much larger than we anticipated." Ethan stared out the window, watching Seattle move on as usual. Cars passed. Pedestrians crossed streets. Life continued, while an empire quietly collapsed. "What does that mean?" he asked. "It means Gavin Holt isn't facing just a handful of charges," Meena replied. "We're talking about money laundering, organized fraud, and a kickback network that's been operating for years. His sentence won't be light." When the call ended, Ethan sat in silence for a long time. There was no sense of victory, only an unfamiliar calm. His mind drifted back to the gala night, the $1 bill, the laughter in that ballroom. He had thought he hit rock bottom that night. Now he understood it had only been the starting point of a much larger truth. His phone buzzed. Lauren Blake. Ethan hesitated for half a breath, then answered. Her voice was tight, stretched thin. "Have you seen the news?" she asked bluntly. "How does this affect Gavin's shares, my bonuses, the house?" There was no apology, no concern for Ethan, only calculation. In that moment, he finally saw the woman he had avoided seeing for years. "I lost what mattered a long time ago," he said evenly. "You should talk to your lawyer." He ended the call. No anger, no pain. Just a clean cut, severing a rope that had been rotting for a long time. Across the city, Gavin Holt was no longer smiling. His office was crowded with lawyers. Phones rang without pause. Partners demanded answers. Suppliers insisted on immediate payment. The people who once bowed their heads now kept their distance. Gavin slammed his fist on desks. Barked orders tried to control the narrative. But every attempt to patch the damage only revealed deeper cracks. North Sound began to fracture from the inside. Employees whispered in hallways. Emergency meetings multiplied. Emails were deleted. Files were moved. It was too late. Once light pours in, darkness cannot pretend it still owns the room. Ethan watched it all from a distance, like a man who had stepped out of a storm, and now observed it tearing through the city behind him. Marcus updated him on the civil case. They shot themselves in the foot, he said. Retaliatory termination. Clear evidence. The insurance company is already considering settlement. Ethan nodded, but his thoughts were elsewhere. He thought of Miguel, of Rafael, of everyone who risked everything to tell the truth. He thought of the years he stayed silent, believing hard work and loyalty were enough. He learned a lesson no classroom ever taught. Real power does not come from titles. It comes from what you hold when everything begins to fall apart. One evening, Ethan walked alone along the waterfront. The wind was strong, cold, and clean. He felt lighter, not because it was over, but because he no longer had to pretend to be anyone else. No more lowering his head, no more compromising with what he knew was wrong. Somewhere in the city, Gavin Holt lay awake, haunted by emails, numbers, and names he once believed would never return. And Ethan Blake, the man once underestimated, no longer needed to prove anything. He had chosen the truth, and the truth was now doing the work for him. The collapse was not finished, but the direction was clear. And in the quiet of the Seattle night, Ethan knew that no matter how many courtrooms and trials lay ahead, there was one thing no one could ever take from him. Again, the peace of looking into the mirror and not turning away. Gavin Holt was handcuffed early one morning, before the sun had a chance to rise above the massive glass windows of his suburban mansion. The arrest was broadcast live on television. FBI vehicles blocked the driveway. Red and blue lights spun slowly, cold and methodical. Gavin stepped outside in his bathrobe, hair disheveled, his face drained by something he had never truly known before: fear. Reporters shouted questions, but he said nothing. His head hung low shoulders, heavy as if for the first time in his life, the weight of what he had done had reached his body. Ethan Blake sat on Noah's couch, watching it all in silence. There was no sense of triumph, no satisfaction, only an ending that had taken too long to arrive. He remembered the gala night, Gavin's contemptuous stare, the $1 bill. It all felt like it belonged to another man, another life. But the story didn't end there. That afternoon, Meena Patel called Ethan. Her voice was slower now, more cautious. "Gavin is trying to negotiate," she said. "He wants a reduced sentence." How Ethan asked, a chill running down his spine. "By offering information on others," Meena replied. "People who may have been involved or who knew about the transactions. Lauren is one of the names he mentioned." Lauren's name fell into the air like a heavy object. Ethan was silent for a long time. He had prepared himself for many things, but not this. "What did she do?" he asked. "We don't know yet," Meena said. "Gavin claims she signed some documents, possibly validating valuations, possibly helping conceal cash flow. We need to investigate." When the call ended, Ethan sat motionless. Images of Lauren in her gala dress overlapped with her panicked face in the lawyer's office. He did not know where the full truth lay, but he knew this: every choice has consequences, and no one stands completely outside them. The next day, Lauren appeared at Noah's apartment door. No designer clothes, no heavy makeup, just jeans, a thin jacket, hair pulled back hastily. She looked smaller, more fragile, as if her armor had been stripped away. "Ethan, can I come in?" she asked softly. They sat across from each other at the kitchen table. There was no anger left, only the exhausted tension of two people who once knew each other too well. Lauren spoke without circling. "Gavin's lawyers want me to lie," she said. "They want me to say you threatened him, that you lost control. Will you do it?" Ethan asked, his eyes fixed on her. Lauren shook her head. "No, I've done too many things wrong already. I won't help a criminal escape." She paused, her voice trembling. "But Gavin says if I don't cooperate, he'll tell the FBI I knew about some of the deals." Ethan leaned forward. "Did you know?" Lauren lowered her head. Tears fell onto the table. "I knew part of it," she whispered. He asked me to sign documents, valuation reports, vendor contracts. I didn't read them carefully. I thought they were just formalities. The silence stretched. Ethan felt a deep, heavy exhaustion. Not pity, not rage, just the realization that betrayal does not happen in a single moment. It is built from hundreds of small choices. You need a criminal defense lawyer immediately, Ethan said. And you need to tell the truth, all of it. Lauren looked up, eyes red. Will you help me? Ethan thought for a long time, thinking of the other victims, the people who had lost everything to this system. I'll give you the name of a good lawyer, he said, but I won't cover for you or lie for you. You have to face the consequences yourself. Lauren nodded, tears still falling. I understand. As she stood to leave, Lauren turned back one last time. I'm sorry, she said, especially for that night. I was cruel. Ethan nodded. I know. The door closed. This time there was no pain, only a necessary ending. Months later, Gavin Holt pleaded guilty to multiple charges: fraud, money laundering, organized kickbacks. The sentence was delivered in a packed courtroom. When the judge read the 25-year federal prison term, Gavin did not lift his head. Ethan was there as a victim. When invited to speak, he stood his voice steady. He didn't just steal money, Ethan said. He stole dreams, effort, and dignity from many people. But he failed to take the one thing that mattered most from me. When Ethan walked out of the courthouse that day, the sky was gray, but open. He knew everything was not completely over, but a chapter had closed, and for the first time in a long while, the past no longer pulled him backward. The settlement arrived on a quiet afternoon when Ethan Blake was washing a glass in the kitchen and no longer expecting anything from the world. The envelope was thick, bearing the letterhead of the insurance company. Marcus Reed called immediately, after his voice low but firm. They want to end this quickly. A settlement for retaliatory termination. $1.2 million. Ethan set the glass down, water dripping from his hand. There was no celebration, no racing heartbeat, only a cold confirmation that what he had endured, finally, had a name. You could refuse, Marcus continued. Take it to trial. Possibly more money, but it could drag on for years. Ethan looked out the window at Seattle's pale gray sky. Accept it, he said. I don't want my life stuck here one more day. A few weeks later, the check was signed, not as a reward, but as the closing line of a chapter. Marcus shook Ethan's hand, pride in his eyes. You didn't just win a case, he said. You forced them to admit what they did. Lauren Blake was not there that day. She had moved back to Iowa, staying temporarily in a small apartment with a friend. Each month, Ethan received an envelope with no return address written in Lauren's handwriting. He never opened them, not out of anger, but because he had chosen to let the past rest. The remaining proceedings unfolded quietly. Witnesses testified one by one. Shell companies were dissolved. Accounts were frozen. People who once spoke loudly learned to lower their voices. Some North Sound executives chose to settle. Others lost their jobs. The machine that once crushed others now turned inward and ground itself down. Ethan no longer stayed deeply involved. He watched from a distance like someone who had left a suffocating room just before it collapsed. He spent more time with Noah, simple dinners, conversations, without the need to prove anything. He slept more deeply. The recurring dreams of chandeliers and cruel laughter finally faded. One morning, Ethan walked into a small rented office and signed the papers to form his own company, Blake Forensic Consulting. No flashy logo, no grand slogan, just a room, a desk, and a clear purpose to help people without a voice understand what had been done to them. His first client was Rafael Soto. The man who once trembled on the phone now stood upright signing documents for the restaurant he had reopened. I don't want this to happen again, Raphael said. Ethan nodded. It won't. Then came Miguel. Then Maria. Small business owners who had been taught that silence was the only way to survive. Each file was a story. Each story reminded Ethan that the gala night did not just destroy a marriage, it opened a different path. In his new office, Ethan hung a wooden frame behind his desk. Inside was the old $1 bill. Its corners curled the word rent, still faintly visible in ink. Clients often asked about it. Ethan would simply smile. A souvenir, he said, from the worst deal my former boss ever tried to make. Occasionally, Ethan received messages from an unfamiliar number, Gavin Holt's sister. She asked to talk, to seek forgiveness. Ethan replied once briefly and clearly. I don't hate your brother, but I don't owe him my time, my attention, or my forgiveness. His choices led him here. A year passed. The city remained the same, but Ethan did not. One afternoon he sat alone in his office as rare sunlight poured through the window. He looked at his reflection in the glass. There was no emptiness left, no rage, only steady calm. He finally understood something he had never been taught. Being a man is not about holding on to everything at any cost. It is about knowing what you refuse to sell: your dignity, your name, your self-respect. The night he chose the truth, he lost almost everything. But in that loss, he kept the one thing money can never buy. And when Ethan Blake locked his office door and the lights dimmed behind him, he knew he had stepped into a life where he no longer needed to bow his head. Ethan Blake received the call on what seemed like an ordinary evening, and with a single short sentence, the past he believed was closed burst its doors wide open. Meena Patel's voice on the line was not panicked, but it carried enough gravity for Ethan to know this was serious. Gavin Holt is making one last attempt to reduce his sentence, she said. He submitted a new list. Lauren's name is on it. The air in the room seemed to freeze. Ethan sat still, the desk lamp casting light onto the wooden frame, holding the $1 bill behind him, the symbol of a life he had already left behind. What did she do? He asked slowly and clearly. We're verifying, Meena replied. There are indications Lauren signed several documents related to valuations and vendor contracts. Gavin claims she knew, or at least chose, to look away. After the call, Ethan did not turn on the lights. He let the room remain in darkness, listening to the distant sounds of the city. Part of him wanted to laugh bitterly. Another part was simply tired. He thought he had escaped that vortex, yet the truth had a way of returning when people believed they were finally safe. The next day, Lauren stood at the door of Ethan's office. No warning, no dramatics. She wore a simple jacket, her face pale. When Ethan opened the door, they both froze, as if time had pulled them back to an intersection neither had fully left. I don't have much time, Lauren said, her voice trembling slightly. Gavin's lawyers want me to sign an affidavit. They say it's the only way for him to reduce his sentence. They told me if I refuse, he'll drag me down with him. Ethan invited her in. The door closed softly but firmly. They sat across from each other, an empty wooden table between them. What did you sign? Ethan asked. Lauren lowered her head. Valuation reports, some vendor contracts. I didn't read them carefully. I thought they were just formalities. Gavin said everything was legal. Her voice broke. I know that doesn't excuse it. Ethan listened without interrupting, without judgment. In his mind appeared the faces of others, Miguel, Raphael, Maria, people who had lost far more than Lauren to the same system. Did you know where the money was going? He asked. No, Lauren shook her head. I never saw the cash flow. It was just my signature. Silence stretched between them. Ethan looked out the window, street lights painting long streaks across the glass. If you lie, he said, you'll carry it for the rest of your life. And in the end, It will come back anyway. Lauren nodded, tears falling. I don't want to lie anymore. Ethan stood, opened a drawer, and took out a business card. A criminal defense lawyer, he said. Good. Independent. You need to see him immediately, and you need to tell the full truth. I won't cover for you, and I won't stand against you if you choose what's right. Lauren held the card, her hand shaking. Why are you helping me? She asked softly. Ethan thought for a long time before answering. Because the truth needs to be told completely, he said, without selection. A few weeks later, Mina called again. Lauren cooperated, she said. Her testimony matches the documents. The prosecutor is considering conditional immunity. Ethan closed his eyes and exhaled. No relief, no triumph. Just another knot untied the right way. In detention, Gavin Holt received the news. He reacted with rage, then fell silent. His final cards were gone. The supplemental sentencing took place in the familiar courtroom. Ethan did not speak. He sat quietly listening as facts were confirmed by law. When it ended, he left before the crowd spilled out. That evening, Ethan walked along the waterfront. The wind was strong, cold, but clean. He thought about the line between forgiveness and responsibility. Forgiveness does not erase consequences. Responsibility does not require hatred. The hardest thing is not standing up to the powerful, but standing straight when the truth demands you do not protect anyone. Ethan stopped looking at the dark, still water. He understood that the true ending of this story was not the sentence or the settlement. It was the moment you choose not to bend the truth to make yourself more comfortable. And in that silence, Ethan Blake knew he had walked the path he chose to its end, without avoiding it, without turning back, and without owing anyone a single lie. Ethan Blake knew his story truly closed on a very ordinary morning when he stood in front of the mirror and no longer saw the man who had bowed his head years ago. There was no courtroom, no breaking news, no phone vibrating non-stop. Only the pale morning light resting on his face, calm and clear. The man in the mirror was not richer in fame, not more powerful in title, but he possessed something he had never truly had before: respect for himself. The office of Blake Forensic Consulting was small, quiet, unadorned. On the wall behind his desk hung the familiar wooden frame. Inside it, the old $1 bill, its edges worn by time. Many people noticed it and asked about it. Ethan no longer told the story with bitterness. He simply said it was a reminder not of humiliation, but of boundaries. That morning, Carlos called him from a small, newly opened restaurant. The voice of the man who once trembled with fear now carried confidence. "Without you, I never would have dared to stand up," Carlos said. Ethan listened in silence. He understood that the most important thing was not the fall of an empire, but ordinary people learning to stand straight again. Elsewhere, Lauren Blake lived a very different life from before. No more parties, no more empty promises. She worked full-time and learned to take responsibility for each choice she made. From time to time, Ethan still received letters with no return address written in her handwriting. He still did not open them, not out of hatred, but because some chapters do not need to be reread to understand that they are over. Gavin Holt within cold concrete walls no longer had the power to command or buy silence. The empire built on fear had dissolved. But Ethan no longer thought much about him. Gavin's collapse was not a personal victory. It was simply the natural consequence of truth, no longer being hidden. One afternoon when the office was empty, Ethan turned off the lights, locked the door, and paused for a moment in the hallway. He remembered the gala night, the mocking eyes, the $1 bill falling against his chest. Back then, he believed he had lost everything. Now he understood that the only thing nearly taken from him was his dignity, and he had not sold it. There was one lesson Ethan learned the hardest way. Being a man is not about winning every game, not about holding on to everything. It is about knowing when to say no, even when the cost is losing almost everything: a job, a marriage, an image. In return, you gain the ability to look into the mirror without turning away. The world continued on. New parties, new powerful figures, new promises. But Ethan knew that somewhere there would always be people underestimated, disrespected, pushed into corners. And if his story meant anything, it was a reminder that real strength does not lie in how many people admire you, but in who you refuse to become when you are forced to bow your head. As Ethan stepped outside, the evening breeze was light, clean, and cool. He smiled not because the past had disappeared, but because it no longer held power over him. If you have followed this story to the very end, perhaps somewhere inside you, there was once a moment of being looked down on, humiliated, or forced into silence. Remember this: your worth is not in what others throw at you, but in what you decide not to accept. We would love to know where in the world you are watching this story, and whether it is morning, afternoon, or evening for you right now. Please leave a comment and share how you feel. If this story resonated with you, do not forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel so we can continue this journey together. Wishing you a peaceful day, and see you again soon.